Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, CK, and today we're going to be talking about our picks for some of the most overrated cards that see play in the CEDH format. Our merchandise is running out. Our tokens and sleeves have already sold out. Be sure to pick up a playmat while we still have some in stock. They are going fast. Please get on that at playingwithpowermtg.com. You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons get benefits like access to our Discord, early access to videos, names in the credits of our shows. There are tiers for everyone, so go to patreon.com/playingwithpowermtg and help support the show. Also, if you're looking to sponsor the podcast, please reach out in the email below. And as said before, Patreons get a shout out every episode. And today's Patreon shout out goes to Mike Schroeder. Thank you so much for helping us out, Mike. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mike. You are the best.
Awesome. So today we are going to probably hurt some feelings.
Make some people mad. All right.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I want to do every Thursday, every Tuesday. That's when I wake up. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about what are the overrated, in our opinion, what are the overrated CEDH cards that see a lot of play in this format, and we have a criteria here, so we're not just like going for everybody's cards.
I am, but I'm gonna.
Ryan is, but for
that's Oracle, overrated, dead card, dead draw. I'm just kidding.
Absolutely. But for everybody at home, just so you know why we're picking these cards and kind of our thought process behind it, here's the criteria that we're gonna have here for each of the cards. So what criteria are we using to decide what an overrated CEH card is? So we've decided that number one, the card must see average or above average play in the format. So we can't just pick, I don't know, trying to think of a
card that is in two decks. Yeah, a card that's in two decks out of 200. That's not exactly what you would call an overrated card.
Absolutely. It has to see play in some form or fashion on average in the format. Number two, the card's intended purpose in the list that it's played in must either A, not be realized on average, or B, could be fulfilled by a better card. So essentially, if the card is meant to, do a card draw engine in your deck, we have to be able to come up with examples or think of examples in which that could be processed better or by something else entirely. Which I think makes sense. You know, if it's overrated, there should be a reason why we're a scale in which we're rating it, right?
Yeah, and not to mention that the idea that maybe just the mechanic or the effect is overrated. Oh wow, look at this super cool case where I can do A, B, and C, and I'm just going to completely take over the game. And that's something that doesn't never realistically happen except for in really, really, really edge cases, or one out of every 100 games.
Absolutely. And then number three, in our last criteria here, the card must be in the 99. So we're not doing commanders today. The only reason we're doing that is because that's another episode we can milk out of you guys.
Yeah. Honesty is the best policy in 2024 on the Play with Power podcast.
Yeah. So let us know if you want overrated commanders. But today we're really focused on the 99 cards that you're going to see in piles rather than leading piles. And that's kind of the thought process that we've had for our cards. So we've done, I want to say 5 cards.
5 cards each. Yep.
Yeah.
10. Yep.
Yeah. So nice clean list here. And I think we're just going to go back and forth, pinging off and talking about our picks here. So you ready to kick us off, Ryan? I can start us, but you ready?
Yeah. Let's dive in.
Awesome. So my number one pick here for an overrated CEH card is Opposition Agent. Now, this is a card that sees a ton of play, and I already know people are probably starting to type in the comments.
Furiously.
What are you talking about?
I can't believe you put this card on there.
Yeah. I know some people are going to hate me, but it's for specific reasons. My reason why is the card, in my opinion, relies on the gotcha factor to work properly. It's, for anybody who does not know what this card does, it's 2 and a black for a creature that has flash. And essentially says that anytime your opponent would search their library while this card is on the board, you control them while searching the library and get to exile any cards they would find. And then you can cast those cards with the timing restrictions in place. So right off the bat, that sounds amazing. But the reason why I have it here as overrated is because it relies so much heavily on the gotcha factor in terms of your opponents not necessarily being able to play around the card in order for it to work, or your opponent's punting into it, meaning that they make the mistake of forgetting that it's a variable that could happen. And I think any card that relies on my opponents to not be good at the game automatically, to me, it makes it seem like that's a bad card. Not bad, but just not the best in terms of what it could be. Because I want the card to have value because it has value. If I play opposition agent outright on my turn, I'm wasting 3 mana because immediately somebody is going to try and remove it because now it's just a sax piece, right? And people are going to have to try and play around it or whatever. And in that instance, while yes, I'm stopping my opponents from tutoring, it's just going to eat removal, right? Or counter spells. And then I'm down 3 mana and a creature on board. If I try to flash it in at most, I'm going to either eat a counter spell. I'm getting, something off of a like fetch or something like that. And that's cool. But again, that is all on the pretense that my opponent does not see me cast a dark ritual and is like, maybe I should have interaction up, or, sees 3 mana with black in the mana pool and is like, maybe I should be wary of that. It's so easily read that I think its effect is kind of diminished by that side of things, because you could easily just play around it if you know that it's there or you know that it's coming, and it's very easily read. That's my pick. I know some people are probably like, oh, but you could tutor it with Wishclaw and then go ahead and do that. I've tried that so many times, and I want to let you know I've punted so many times in that by being like, oh yeah, Wishclaw, go get it, and then they have the counter spell, and now I just gave them a tutor. It's like I got nothing out of it. It feels so bad. That's not good enough for me. So that is why I picked Opposition Agent.
I am 100% in your camp. This is what I would call one of those cute cards that don't really help you in the long run. I know there's a running joke in the CDH community that says, does the endurance player ever win the game? It's so funny. I cast endurance, but then I ended up losing. And it's a joke and it's all funny and stuff like that. But I feel that opposition agent should belong in that joke, because you'll see the opposition agent player get you on a fetch land or something like that. But that's it. The tutoring stops after that. So that doesn't stop tons of draws. That doesn't stop you just bouncing in on the instep. Doesn't stop removal. And and no one's playing into it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and worldly tutor into it. Oh, you got me again. Oh, gee whiz. It's like that doesn't happen. The tutors just stop, and that doesn't mean that the game stops. So I think the problem with this card and why it's mostly overrated is that people have opposition agent and don't capitalize on opposition agent. They just say, okay, well, all the tutors stop now, so now I can just slowly, do whatever, and and they don't really have a payoff that really allows them to seize their opportunities to close out the game under the leverage that opposition agent provides. Most of the time, you'll do it in response to a fetch, grab somebody's land, which is completely worthless, by the way. That has no benefit. Some people got smart to that, and they don't do it on cracking of fetch lands, but they will do it on a tutor or something like that. And there's just you just sit there, you slow down the game a little, but then somebody bounces it, and then that game's over, and you didn't really do anything except for slow down the game. So until people realize that opposition agent needs to be used in conjunction with actually helping you create the window to actually try and close out the game versus just slowing things down for the sake of slowing things down, I think this is just a really overrated card.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And yeah, even if people do make the mistake of playing into it, that has nothing to do with the fact that the card is good. It has everything to do with my opponent made a mistake. And I will not attribute my opponent's mistakes to this card is cracked. Like, no, that's just never the case. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. My number one is Bergie, God of Storytelling. So Bergie is one of those double face cards, and you can cast it on its front side, and every time you cast a spell, you add red, and it doesn't go away until the end of your turn. And the back side is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, where you can discard a card and exile the top two cards of your library, and then you can play those cards as turn. And a lot of people might be initially saying, "Oh wow, why in the world would you say that?" This is a pseudo almost ad nause on the backside. That's so great. And the front side isn't dead either. But is it? See, the thing about Berkey is that a lot of times you are kind of holding out for it to be cast on the backside. So and you have to have a lot of kind of other setup to really make it work. And it's because of all this setup around it that honestly, and a lot of times you see it end up being imprinted under a Chrome Mox or discarded to hand size. And just so many times, it just doesn't give you the payoff that you want for it to do. That's not to say it's dead in everything and it only has super niche applications, but I think it's very overrated because the allure of having two sides that do something beneficial really turns people into ranking it higher than it should be. The backside is great. I've seen people win off of it. The front side is okay. I've seen people do stuff with it, like I don't see people on the front side of Bergie just going absolutely bananas. I like that it is a two-sided thing with two modes and that they're not dead. I think that's great. But I think honestly, more often than not, I don't see people casting this spell on either side and really getting a benefit for it in more stages in the game than I think that they think it is.
As a Bergie player, I will make you eat these words, right?
Bring it on. I'm ready. Let's go.
I agree. I agree to a certain extent. I think Bergie, at least for me, as someone who has put it in the 99 of a lot of lists, specifically Storm lists, like Grixis Storm lists, for the front side rather than the back side of trying to get that extra bit of mana when you're going off, it requires, like you said, so much else going on for it to even be a beneficial piece on your board. And even then, it's like I was probably already winning beforehand or in a good spot beforehand, at least on the front side. The back side, yeah, it has its uses. But even then, I'm usually casting that if I have a breach, in which case I'm also getting the discarded cards back, like things like that. Which, if I have breach and it's resolved, I'm probably winning again anyway. So it doesn't really
you don't need
matter.
Harnfell to win with breach. That's not what cracks breach wide open. Yeah,
exactly. So I think it always feels like a win more card for me. Like the front side, it's really good with Displacer Kitten, but I think everything is good with Displacer Kitten. So
every card's good with Displacer. Every non-creature card's good with. I'm sorry, non-land permanent. Isn't that what flickers it? Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
It gives you the mana to like keep flickering it and keep going and like twiddle with like Tavesh and Crom, and that's cool. But again, anything can, like it doesn't, you don't need it. I don't think it's necessary. So I agree with you on that. I do think that for me, a lot of the times that Bergie is useful, so is just about any other card under the sun at that point. And so it's two sides that are decent and do a cool thing, but under what guys are you actually doing those things, and did you really need it to get to where you were going at that same point? I agree.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this card, it takes 3, you'd have to cast 3 spells just for it to break even, because it costs 3 to cast on the front side. And like I said, Harnfell can be good as long as you have all the setup necessary to execute it, then it's great. But if you're talking about how it gets better with breach or it gets better with this or that or the other, I'm not looking for something to make something better. I'm looking for something that, lets me win the game. And this definitely kind of qualifies as one of those win more cards, like you said.
Absolutely. And again, to your point, it also makes only red mana, in which case, if I go with it and I'm trying to, storm off and then I get blue spell, blue spell, blue spell, or black spell, black spell, black spell. All right, cool. I guess I can cut down on the generic cost of this, but this doesn't really help me that much. So
exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Yeah. I don't. I will fight for you if someone thinks that that is not a overrated card. I got you.
I run it in Godo, and I still don't like drawing it. I
It's not the
still don't like.
best. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I guess. Prince to Chromox. Here we go. I guess this is my London Mulligan. Here we are.
Sweet. Nice. Oh man. Cool. I think that's a really good pick. My number two is, I think, very similar to my number one, and that is Notion Thief. I think Notion Thief, if you're still playing Notion Thief in the year of our Lord 2024, I urge you to please reconsider. For 4 mana, you get a card that is threatening, right? At first glance, the idea that I'm going to take all of your draws in a mid-range format, no less. That's really cool. That would scare anybody. But it's 4 mana for a thing that dies to an Orcish Bowmaster's trigger, or a damage trigger for that matter, and it actively feeds Bowmasters if it's not yours, which sucks. And it also has that same problem with Opposition Agent that I was talking about, that requires you to have that gotcha factor. It requires you to have 4 open mana and put it in at the, slightest idea of your opponents being able to draw something, or like a wheel or something else. And okay, cool. Yeah, your opponent puts a wheel on the stack and you're like, cool, Notion Thief. All right, you have to fight through 3 opponents because there's no way anybody's trying to let that resolve. Nobody's going to want to give you that thing. Sure, if it does resolve and it does do the thing, congrats, you get all the cards in the world, and that's great. Same thing with Opposition Agent. If they do play into it and I do get the tutors, great, it's amazing. But how often is that actually happening? And do I really want to spend 4 mana for something that is, more often than not, I'm pitching to like a force? I cannot tell you the last time I've been able to resolve a Notion Thief, and that's not even because of just bad timing or anything. It's just, it always eats counterspells everything else, especially before a wheel, in which case somebody is trying to go off with the cards that they just drawn, or like a One Ring or whatever. And now, because we just wasted all of our counter magic on this one Notion Thief, nobody has anything to fight for whatever's happening, and we're just all sick. And it's all because you tried to play this dumb 4 mana card. So, yeah, that is my pick for Notion Thief.
I think Notion Thief. I think a large part of the reason that I think Notion Thief is overrated is because it's trying to steer you into a play pattern. If Notion Thief didn't have Flash, I would say that it would almost be better. I'm not saying it is better. I'm saying it would almost be better, because when something says Flash, people just don't want to cast it in their main phase. They would rather hold open 4 mana and pass the turn with 4 up just so they can get you. It's like you said, look at Opposition Agent. It's a gotcha card. I got you. Oh, you cast something and you're about to draw cards. I got you, and that is not what a good card is made of. So the idea that I could cast Notion Thief and steal everybody's draws, everyone's going to stop drawing, and so you might get one. But then if like no one is drawing because you're holding up 4 and they can see your choreographed play, you're almost not wanting to cast it at the end step or whatever before your turn or something, because you're like, well, I still kind of want to get somebody, and because of that, now you've just time walked yourself, because you're so desperately wanting to get somebody on a wheel or, some sort of draw thing, that you're just not casting it, and you're just slowing down the pace of your game, and you're playing a losing game when you do that. If Notion Thief was just a creature without Flash, you cast it, you dropped it, and then you move to the next turn, now everyone's going to have to deal with it before they can do something. Nothing's changed, and yet somehow the game, you didn't lose tempo. The game has changed, and now you're in a position that is more advantageous because you're not completely tempo swinging yourself by trying to get somebody. And like you said, it's so fragile. It costs 2 pips. It's 4. It's a 1/1. It's powerful. Its effect is powerful, but only if you get something off of it. No one's drawing through Mystic or Rhystic into a Notion Thief. You might get somebody's Esper Sentinel, but that's it. Like, beyond that, you're just kind of sit there dropping your 4-drop to make sure people aren't drawing extra cards. There is value in that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's never usable, but I definitely agree that because of that Flash, it kind of steers people in the wrong direction, and you just end up losing games with a Notion Thief in your hand.
Absolutely. And I really loved what you said specifically of the fact that it steers you into a certain pattern, because that's something I think I was trying to put words to, but couldn't necessarily. But yeah, with it having flash written on it, immediately everybody's like, okay, well, I have to wait until there's a trigger on the stack in order for me to do this, in which narrows this card's whole, versatility by so much, because now I'm waiting until someone is putting, a one ring trigger on the stack, or, all of these different things, when in actuality, you could just use it like a 4-mana stack space. Yeah, so that definitely makes sense. And also in the same colors, you could just pay more mana and get a Consecrated Sphinx, which is way better. So
Oh, is it ever? It's so good.
I love that card so much. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, that is my pick.
So the takeaway from this episode is play more Consecrated Sphinx.
just play it. Why are you doing it? Dude, just tap some more mana. Get a little Sphinx. Draw some cards. It's great.
In mid-range metas, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good card. Okay, so my next pick is Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. I do not like this card. It is so unbelievably overrated. And I think there's multiple reasons why people have been over-evaluating this card for so long. It has a lot of effects on it. I'm not denying that it's a good, strong, powerful card. I think it is overrated in CEDH and EDH in general, quite frankly. In 1v1 formats, it's completely cracked. You've got me there. I am not disagreeing with that one. I'm in 100% agreement with you. If in a 1v1 format, Ragavan is amazing. There is no argument. In our format, it's medium at best and horrible at worst. It's really bad. If you have it turn 1, it's good. Because you can start, connecting and stuff like that. So if it's maybe in your opening hand, not bad. You might be able to even gotcha with somebody who Imperial Seals and passes, then you can dash it in. Okay. Also a super narrow consideration. And the fact that it's in like your early turns, sure. But it just gets worse and worse and worse with every single turn. I will put anything in front of a Ragavan, especially if I've tutored. If I had to imp, seal, and pass, I don't care what's there. I will block with it. And then you can have the arguments about tempo swings and trading and stuff like that and combat math. Yes, we can have that conversation all day long. But combat is not a major part of CDH. It's not. The only ways that we really see combat and combat math really come into play are when you have something like a lot of Tymnas on the board, or if somebody's winning with a Finale of Devastation or something like that. But honestly, Ragavan, yeah, it gets a treasure. Okay, that's nice. Oh, you exile something. I can't tell you the amount of times I see people just exile lands. So you connect it for 2, which means nothing in a 40 life format. You got a treasure. Okay, that's nice. You had red anyway. And there, you really don't connect that many other times unless your meta is so turbo that they just don't have any creatures. Get any sort of meta that has any amount of Tymnas in it, your Ragavan is never connecting because they have creatures too. And they don't want you to get the top of the library. They don't want you to keep connecting with that. They don't want you to get the treasures. They'll just throw something in front of it. It's such an overrated card, and I think it's because it comes over from that huge boogeyman status of the 1v1 formats.
100% agreed. I think the hype of Ragavan from Modern carried over to these other competitive formats, and then people were like, yeah, but it's so good here. Yeah, it's good when there's 60 cards and you're playing 4 copies of all of your most powerful spells, and I'm hitting Crashing Footfalls off the top of your Ragavan. Yeah, that's great. It's amazing in Modern, 100%. It's cracked, play 4, of course. But when I have to go against 3 other people, and they're all building boards at a rate that is way faster than mine, and we're in the mid turns and everybody has a full board, and I just have a 2/1 monkey that I'm just gonna keep trying to swing in, it's doing nothing for me. I've started cutting it out for exactly the reasons that you said. I agree 100%.
Yep. And not to mention that there's a certain other card that's so prevalent in this format. A lot of times Ragavan is doing nothing but creating a treasure, and that card is Drenith Magistrate. It's so prevalent in the format. It blocks Ragavan and kills Ragavan, and it also stops you from ever casting anything off of Ragavan. It's not that Draenor Magistrate doesn't see any play. It sees prolific play. So it is a real silver bullet against this card.
Yeah.
It's just it's so I'm so overrated. I'm sorry. I get so emotional when I talk about Ragavan.
That's so funny. Draenor really is just like on all levels the Ragavan killer. Like
It's
nah.
Draenor is on all levels the insert all of your commanders killer. But yeah.
Oh man, you didn't get Corvold out turn 1. Sucks, dude.
Sorry. The only thing you're helping against is you only got Yuriko maybe to deal with after Drannith resolves.
Exactly. Yeah. Poor monkey. Yeah, I think that's really good. My number 3 is Sylvan Library. This is a card that I keep seeing people put in their decks. Every time it makes me want to scream. Just belt out. Like, please stop. And I understand green currently in the meta that we have now in CEDH can use all of the tools that it needs, right? Like green is the worst color. We hear that a lot. And it is a card draw engine. But as a card draw engine compared to all of the other card draw engines we have available to us right now, it's incredibly slow. It is so slow. And everybody can play the One Ring. One Ring's faster than this. I'm at least getting a card immediately and the protection. So that means as long as my opponent's not winning by combo, like I am still going to have a turn. I would much rather pay 4 mana to get that on the board than Sylvan Library. And then the idea is like, yeah, okay, well, sure, best out of card draw. Yeah, there's other options. But card selection, you get to pick it up and then put it back. It still takes an entire turn rotation for that effect to even take effect. Like, I need to cast this and then wait my entire turn to maybe look at 2 extra cards for the price of 8 life. And games are going longer and longer and longer in this meta. As we said, we're in a mid-range meta. I've had games go to turn, 6, 7, 8, 9. By that point, I'm no longer doing 8 life for 2 other extra cards that do anything else. Especially in the colors of green. A green is a color that it needs a lot more than just 1 or 2 cards to be able to tempo, like swing in for that other tempo and hit that other gear. And so having Sylvan Library there chipping away at my life when other people are probably also hitting me because I'm trying to be a threat, and the cards that I get off of Sylvan Library are not helping me get out of that position, I just would much rather want any other card draw engine. Like, just genuinely speaking, every time that I've had Sylvan Library, I've pitched it to a Force of Vigor or something else because it never helps me. I don't think I've ever said, wow, I really did well in that game and I won that game and it was because of Sylvan Library.
If you are in mono green or maybe Azorius or really, really limited colors that also don't give you some sort of advantage, Sylvan Library is the tool that you can use. And I get it. Like Sylvan Library in those very limited colors, you have to use the tools that are available to you. And that's what you use. I understand that. Literally every other time, it's strictly worse. And like you said, the One Ring is really pushing Sylvan out. I know Sylvan's it's a 2-drop versus a 4-drop. We're not discounting that, but losing 1 life to a card and then 2 life to a card versus 4 life per card is huge. Losing 8 life in 1 turn cycle. Drake Sasser, a former member of the Playing with Power team, championed this concept for a very long time, and he received a lot of pushback on it. A lot of people saying, you're crazy, you're stupid. I can't believe you'd say Sylvan Library is a bad card. Look at its price tag. It's so good. And then he actually wrote an article on this that it'll be in the card and the show notes below. But basically, I'm going to super simplify and just super summarize here. Would you rather have a Sylvan Library or a Rhystic Study? Would you rather have a Sylvan Library or a Demonic Tutor? Like when you try and put it against literally anything that's a similar cost or has a similar effect, the other ones win every single time. And it gets to the point where this thing just gets pushed down and down and down in favor of these other things, especially when you're in higher colors, you're in 3, 4, 5 colors. It just doesn't have a place because its swing is so big. Like you said, 8 life if you want to keep 3. And then after that, you're just doing the stupid Miri's Guile effect where you're kind of scrying 3 on your upkeep. It's just not there anymore. I mean, this card is literally going to be 30 years old this year. This is 2024 as the time of this recording. This card came out in Legends in 1994. It's a 30-year-old card, and we've just had so many different tools since then that just Sylvan Library just doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah, agreed. I do think this is one of those just power crept effects at the time, sure. And yeah, if you are in green and green only, you can use whatever you can get. I understand that. But if we're talking about the top piles that have 4+ colors and everything else, if you don't just play your heuristic study and get over with it, honestly, please.
All right. My number 3 is get out your pitchforks because it's Born Upon a Wind. This card is so overrated. It is insane. And before you hit unsubscribe and block us and all of this other stuff, first of all, I get it. So feel free to. But second of all, when I hear the arguments for this card, I usually ask, doesn't this card also do something similar? Or can't you get a similar effect in that kind of thing and get additional advantage? Or, is that really the reason why you want to do this? And they'll usually kind of give me these half-hearted excuses why Born is better. They'll say, well, because for example, I'll say Final Fortune. Why wouldn't you just use Final Fortune? It's an instant, costs 2 red. You get to go to your turn. You're usually casting on someone else's end step instead. Why aren't you using Final Fortune? You also get to untap, and they'll say, well, Born Upon a Wind replaces itself. Be like, yeah. Be like, well, Born Upon a Wind, I could pitch to Force of Will. Be like, are these seriously the what you're scraping to try and find the reason why Born Upon a Wind is a really, really good card? I've seen people pitch it to Force of Will. Great. Because there's no other blue cards out there that can do that. I've seen people, use it on the end step and draw a card. I'm like, that's a horrible rate. Do nothing. You pay 2. And replace, get a little bit more card velocity. That's not great, especially not in this format. I've seen times when people say at the end step, I'll cast Born Upon a Wind and I'll do all this stuff. And look, I won. And that's why Born Upon a Wind is great. And I'm like, Final Fortune does the exact same thing. And you get an untap, upkeep, and a draw. Why is that not a better one out of the 2? Well, it's less pips. And once again, scraping the barrel to try and find why Born Upon a Wind is better. And I'm just not buying it. I'm not seeing why this one is so much better than all these other cards. And it's fitting the criteria of overrated really, really well. Is it a bad card? No, of course not. I'm not saying it's bad. That's not what this whole episode's about. I'm saying it's overrated. People are putting it in their decks expecting to do all these crazy shenanigans and stuff like that. And it's cool and it's fun. And that's why you remember it. And that's why I think people are overvaluing it. It's that time when you cast Born Upon a Wind on somebody's end step or cast it during your draw step when you're about to lose or something like that. And you manage to pull out this cool win. And it was the most amazing thing ever. And you magically forget all the times that it was absolutely dead in your hand. You could never find a window, even with Born Upon a Wind. And then you lost the game anyway. Those are the ones that no one ever talks about. And I have a feeling, and I've seen in my personal experience, that is more often what Born Upon a Wind is than anything else.
100%. I was very high on this card when it was revealed, and immediately after, I threw it in just about every deck that I could because of that same thought of, Final Fortune does that, but I can draw a card off of this. It's a cantrip. That's pretty cool. Like, blah, 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 blah. And it's worked for me under very niche circumstances. I know when I was playing it in my Thrasios list, one of my favorite things to do with it was leveraging it with Emergent Zone, which I was always playing as well. And so it's like, okay, cool, I'm going to go for Born Upon a Wind. And they're like, oh, okay, cool, now there's a counter war. And then I'm like, oh, cool, great. Now, it let all of that resolve. Awesome, crack Emergent Zone anyways. And I still get the effect, and now all of your counters are out. That's very niche. That's not happening.
That does not make Born Upon a Wind good. No. That's not what made it good.
No, that does not make it good at all. And so every other time that I've played Born Upon a Wind, especially like with Flick, oh, well, you're casting it after you Necro. Well, I Necro for 30. I just feel like I'm going to be fine regardless. Like, I'm winning anyways. I'm pretty good. Or like, oh, after Ad Naus immediately after someone's turn, again, I just Ad Naus. I'm going to be fine. There's again, I think this fits the criteria of what you were talking about with Bergie. This is a card that works with a lot of other cards and makes other cards seem better, but those cards are already good. You don't need it. It doesn't necessarily doesn't have to make anything better when the cards are already good. It's a win more card, in my opinion.
Yep.
I still run it in Grixis piles just because it is another copy of like a Final Fortune effect. And it's at instant speed, so I don't have to worry about like Last Chance or Warrior's Oath. That's fine. But even then, I could just play Last Chance or Warriors. There's so many other cards that do something very similar to this. Or you could just play Emergent Zone, which I think is way better because what are you going to do? Counter a land? No, it's so great. There's so many other ways in which I think this effect can be better used or utilized rather than people are doing currently. And I think until then, this will always be just an overrated card. It's cool. Yeah, you get to draw a card. And sure, you may have won off of it, but you could have won with at least 7 other different cards that we've mentioned at this point.
Yep. I think that when you talk about it being in something like Zur, I think it's great and it's brilliant in Zur. I think it's so good inside of Zur because it wants to tutor Necro for 30, Born Upon a Wind on the instep and win. That's been Shimmer Zur before Born was ever a thing because it wants to flash in the colorless artifacts and do a whole bunch of shenanigans to win the game. That was what Zur did, and Born Upon a Wind was another tool to make Zur better. That's great. That doesn't mean that it goes in every single deck with blue. That was, I think, the misnomer. That's why I think it's overrated because, I'm going to throw it in a Grixis pile. I'm going to throw it in my Esper pile. I'm going to throw it in Kennen in some cases and all this other stuff. And I'm like, these decks don't need this card. And it's just an empty slot. Yes, it'll open up some windows here and there, but Final Fortune does that too, Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for every instance that you're playing Born Upon a Wind, there's at least 10 other cards that will do the same thing, if not better. So,
or just something more useful or more synergistic what you're already trying to do. Like I said,
absolutely.
Born Upon a Wind is an all-star inside of Shimmer Zur. I think it should always be in there. I think it's awesome in there. It does not belong in every deck with blue. Today's podcast is sponsored by Card Conduit. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value of my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best buy list price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would have from a major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list price against the specific condition of a card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the show notes or the description, or use the promo code POWER, you'll also get 10% off their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's podcast.
My number 4 here is Muddle the Mixture. This is a card that I've been off of for a minute, and I hope that what I'm about to say gets through to some people, similar to the Sylvan Library argument. I think this card is good. It has major upside, being able to be, 3 mana, hard to counter tutor for a lot of amazing 2-drops in the format. A format where 2-drops include like Thoracle, Breach, Dockside. A lot of cards that do just kind of have that hidden text of, oh, win me the game on it. It does that, and that's great. I think blue is especially cool to have these effects because having that written on a card that is also an instant counter is really cool. There are a couple things that I think hold this card back from just being an auto include in all of these decks, though. Mainly being the fact that the tutor effect costs 3 mana, 2 blue pips, and is sorcery speed. So it's highly telegraphed. I know exactly what you're doing when you're doing it. Oh yeah, go and get Dockside. Okay, cool. So let me go ahead and prepare for a Dockside. Oh, or you're getting Breach. Okay, cool. Well, let me go ahead and you're getting something, and everybody at the table immediately knows it. Versus if this was something, it would be busted if you could do this at instant speed, and I understand why it's not that. I'm not saying it should be, but I'm saying that because it isn't, it does knock down a few points, in my opinion, as well as the fact that, oh, but it's tied to a tutor. I meant not a tutor, sorry, counterspell. Yeah, it's a counterspell that counters an instant or sorcery spell, which is worse than counterspell and mana drain. For the same cost. They both target whatever spell you want in the entire format versus this, which is like, okay, good in a stack war. But outside of that, what else am I countering? You know, and ad nauseam, sure. Again, 2 blue pips. It's very specific in that regard. And I think a card that is very specific on the tutor side as well as specific on the counter side, now we have a card that is niche on both ends, and now it just ends up rotting in my hand. I cannot tell you the last time I've been able to actually successfully cast a Muddle the Mixture in a sack war and it actually made a difference versus me just playing, I don't know, something like a Dispel or anything else that's more mana efficient and it can hit more targets or is just better overall. And if we're talking tutors, most of the time I'm playing another color anyways, like black or anything, and can just straight up tutor. Like, it's not that big of a deal. I think that because it is restrictive on both sides, that's what puts it down for me. I know some people are probably already right. Like, what are you talking about? That's fine. If you like it, I love it. Great. But just personally for me, it's rotten in my hand so many times because of that restriction of you can only do this at sorcery speed. It's 3 mana to do so. And if I'm using it in a counter where I have to wait until something's already being processed for me to even be able to accurately use this because it only targets instants and sorceries. I can't counter something like a Dockside or you know, any other creature-based combos, which are coming up more than you think in this meta now. You know, we're in a mid-range meta. A lot more things are being tied to creatures or, you know, artifacts or things of that nature that I do not want to hit the board, and this doesn't do anything for that. And so because of that, I think there are better counterspells for it. There are better tutors for it. And they're, yeah, it does both, but it does both worse. So that's my pick.
You know what I love, TK? Mm-hmm. Discourse. That's what I love. You are a fool. This is an amazing card. I love this card so much. I think it's underrated. I think a lot of people have cut it. But in all reality, I think that this, all of your points are absolutely sound. This is a strictly worse counterspell. It's probably the least of the counterspells in your deck as far as stack interaction goes. It's the bottom of the list. This is also probably the bottom of your list for tutors. And so it's probably the worst tutor in your deck because this isn't a tutor for 3. It's a tutor for 5 because you can only get a 2-drop with it. You can only get it as a sorcery. And unless you want to just be like, hey, here's a really pivotal game piece past the turn, that's never going to resolve. People will find a way to get it out of your hand or interact with it on your turn. So you're going to need 5 mana to be able to execute it on the turn that you go off. So you're going to have to probably have a different type of strategy altogether just to utilize this card. You're going to need probably more than likely 3 pips because it's 1 and 2 blue to transmute. Transmutability, which is a search ability, is hard to interact with, which is fantastic, but it only gets 2 drops, like you said, and you fetch up the card, and you're going to want to cast it right then. And a lot of times you're not grabbing some colorless card that's 2-drop. You're casting something that's very pivotal and game ending. So you're looking for a lot of pips, which means that this isn't really just an anytime tutor. This is one of those tutors can only really be cast in the mid-late to late game. So we're talking at least, 5 mana just to execute something, and at least 3 pips to probably execute something in an actual manner that it affects the game state. So that's a lot of mana to hold up. That's a lot to have to go right. And it's like, well, it's never really dead because it also has a counterspell attached to it. I agree that is really nice that you could put 2 things into one, but you're probably putting the 2 worst effect of those 2 things onto a card, which does bump it up from the bottom of the list. But unfortunately, it's only probably worth a quarter of each. So it only really kind of bumps it up a quarter of the way on the list. So it's usually the top third to the bottom 25% of any given list as far as these effects go. So it's really great, especially if you're at budgets or something like that. And it's really great if you're trying to really maximize the slots that you have in your deck. But you're right, it's the worst at doing both of those things. I love Muddle the Mixture personally. I think everybody should be running it, but I can't ignore that those are really, really good points to bring up about it.
Well, that was nice discourse, Ryan. I appreciate it.
now the real discourse. You're an idiot. You're so dumb. Why would you ever disagree with Muddle?
That's what I was preparing for. But that was great. Yeah, I do think that the fact that it is like variable does bring it up points. And so if anybody's like, well, it at least does both, and that's really cool, I totally understand it. So I understand that this might not be on everybody's list, but at least for me, it's rotted in my hand a lot more often than it's been useful. So,
yep, I agree. All right, my number 4 is a bit of a cheat, but they all kind of go into this central category, and that is whatever the latest 2-drop flying blue Tymna attacker is being released with the latest set. What I'm talking about are the Ledger Shredders, the Fairy Masterminds, the Malcolm Alluring Scoundrels of the world. Everybody, whenever this card is inevitably released every 3 months, everybody just loses their mind and says, this is such a good card. This is such an amazing card. Look at the abilities of this card. Oh my God, what a great card. And they're just wrong every single time, because they'll try it out, realizes it completely underperforms and doesn't get what you want. And it doesn't really execute the plan like you thought it would because you're really over evaluating it. And then of course it gets cut for the next one that comes out, and you do the exact same thing all over again. Everyone was like, oh my God, Ledger Shredder, let me tell you about all the benefits of Ledger Shredder. Fuels my breach, allows me to do card selection, gets bigger, becomes a threat, blah, 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 blah. Attacks with my Tymna. Okay, that's nice. Why are they all being cut from everyone's decks then? Well, that's because Fairy Mastermind came out in March of the Machine. And let me tell you this, and whenever someone draws and I get to draw, and that's such a good card advantage engine, and it's blah, 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 blah. Okay, then why is that one being cut from every list? Well, because Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. And you see what I'm saying here. For some reason, everybody over-evaluates the latest 2-drop flying Tymna attacker that comes out. And they automatically throw it into their blue farm lists. They automatically throw it into their Malcolm lists. They automatically just do that over and over again. And every single time it goes through this 3-month ebb where everybody's really high on it. It even ends up in the CDH staples list, which we've talked about in a previous episode, linked to that in the appropriate areas. And then I see it fall off the CDH staples list because everybody replaced it with the next one. And it's not that they're better. They realized the other one was underperforming and they replaced it with another. And then they replaced it with another. And then they did that over and over and over again. And I just really wish people would stop over evaluating these cards. These are the definitions, in my opinion, of overrated CEDH cards. Fairy Mastermind has flash and I can get it on an extra draw. Yeah. Okay. Did it win you the game? No, it didn't. It didn't even get me close to winning the game. It's just sitting there. It's just replace Fairy Mastermind with any other of those 2-drop flyers, and you'll just have that argument over and over again. I'm so upset right now. But anyway, that's my category as number 4 because this would have filled all 5 of them, honestly.
I find it funny because I actually do remember one of the first conversations we ever had, me and Ryan, was about Fairy Mastermind. I think I was talking about adding it to one of my lists, and we were both like, but is it going to be good? And I was like, I don't know, Ryan, it might be. And then I immediately cut it maybe like a week after. So that's really funny that this hatred is coming full circle. I think I complete. First of all, let me say that I do completely agree. I think that there's always a cycle of these flyers that comes out, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is gonna be busted." Blah 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 blah. I'm gonna put this in this pile, and it's great. And then you never see it because it's a 100 card singleton, and when you do, it dies, and then you're like, "Oh, I didn't even draw a single card off of that. That sucks." I can give reason to maybe, hopefully, give reason to the fact of why people do it, and I think it's because they're the pattern that I'm seeing with all of these cards is they're blue. And I think blue has now been associated in our meta with these very powerful mid-range draw effects. Things like Talion, things like Ristic, things like Mystic, things, all these things. And so when people immediately see a blue card that costs less, that has flash, that flies, that says draw a card whenever somebody does this thing, hops on one foot, claps behind their back, something. Like people immediately are like, oh, this is so busted because blue has a history of having these effects. What people don't know is those effects are good because they're good. Not every effect is going to be able to be that, especially when tied to these very weenie little blue cards that are getting hurt all of the time. It's not really happening. I know Ledger Shredder was one of those cards I was also high on. And I was like, this card is probably way better in EDH than 60 card because, oh man, there's 3 other opponents who get to trigger it. It always dies. Always. And if it doesn't, sure, I'm swinging for a lot, but it's card selection too. If my hand size is low, then it doesn't really help me because I'm like, I need all of these. I don't have anything. Fairy Mastermind, can't tell you the last time that actually helped me at all. It was 2 mana to sit and look and have a great time. And Malcolm, I tried it for 2 games specifically in Tevish Crom. Never again. That card is gone. I think I gave away my copies. I had like 2 showcase copies. I tried one in Blue Farm, the other one in Tevish Crom, and I said, this card is trash.
Somebody Gilded Draked it, and you're like, just keep it. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Have it. And what's so funny is, too, I also specifically remember us talking about that card in underrated CDH cards, and you were like, no, that's trash, and I was like, no, nope. This is trash.
Nah, man, you can cast it for free when it's got the counters on it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was like, oh, yeah. Ryan. Immediately it died, and I was like, Ryan's right, this card sucks. So moral of the story is, please listen to Ryan Street, everybody.
But I think that you actually really did bring up a really good point, is that I think that just because of its color alone, I think we as CDH players tend to inflate the value of something automatically. And I think that's because some of the heuristics that I talked about with Born Upon a Wind. Well, I get nothing else, I can pitch it to a Force of Will. Like that automatically gives it this innate value above other cards that are just downright better. And I think we tend to over-evaluate and overinflate the power of something simply because it's blue. I think that's a really good point you brought up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think blue has this very boogeyman-esque thought process associated with it in CEDH specifically, just because of everybody being so high on Ristic and Mystic and those card effects now. And so anything that seems remotely like it's going to do the same thing, people are like, oh, that's going to be great. When in actuality, paying 1 for every spell to get a card or the lack thereof, it's just a really good effect. That's not going to be every blue card. And I'm sorry to say for everybody.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I think that was a great pick. Though you did cheat. That is like 7 different cards. But yeah,
They're all the same card if we're being honest here. They're the same card.
True.
Yeah.
My number 5, and this is probably, if nothing else gets me beat up on the street, this is probably going to be the one. It's Defense Grid. Yay!
You better be prepared to defend your thesis.
Yeah. I was writing this, and I was like, yeah, I wanted to put it as my number 1, but I was like, nah, maybe I'll find other 5 cards that are probably up here that I feel more strongly about. And I was like, nah, man, this is it. And let me remind you, I do play Grixis. I love Grixis. I do play Defense Grid. I do think it's overrated for what it is, though. And the reason why is because I think the card is a necessary evil for most Storm decks, because it provides that protection that all these other decks that are coming up in the meta have, in the terms of like silence effects, like Blue Farm has silence, Grand Abolisher, things like that. Being able to just not, cast it and essentially have this virtual silence effect is great. The problem that I have with it, and the reason why I say it's overrated, is because everybody treats it like it's this virtual silence effect when it is not. Yes, your opponents do have to pay 3 extra mana for their spells. Trinisphere does the same thing, and I can tell you every time I cast a Trinisphere, people still interact with me. They may not interact as much, but they do. It doesn't mean that they can't. And so many times I see people like, oh, Defense Grid, and great, I'm good. And then fall into the trap that somebody is willing to just pay the extra mana to, counter your thing. And now you're stuck there. You don't have the actual resources to counter or go into a stack war because you didn't hold all of those cards because you were banking on this Defense Grid to do the job for you. And now you pass and the other person untaps now with this Defense Grid live and wins. And you gave it to him. That has happened so many times. I've seen it happen so many times. I've accidentally gave it to some people more than I'm willing to admit. I think this card just honestly, I think in theory, yeah, it's a necessary evil, and if it goes, it goes. But every so often now, especially with cards and decks being more mana efficient than they ever have been now, just because card quality overall has upshifted. We've got decks like Kinnan, Blue Farm, and all of these other that are just good piles of cards sitting around that can generate mana and can play around your 3 mana restriction a lot easier than you think. And there's also abilities of cards too. Sometimes now I don't even have to cast a card to interact with you like you think. And that's, I think all of that is to be considered when we're talking about Defense Grid. And yeah, it's cool and it's a cool restriction, but it's a restriction in which you have to be almost certain that you have it. And the problem with Defense Grid, when compared to other silence effects, is the fact that 1, we're comparing it to other silence effects when it is not. And 2, when comparing it to silence effects, you cannot be certain that you have it because it is not. And so when it's like, okay, comparing it to other cards that do anything, it is the worst of its kind. And sure, it's 2 mana, and you can play it in the colors that don't have access to white, but you have to back it up with so much in order for it to be certain that I would much rather just have the extra counterspell in my hand to actually fight through interaction rather than wasting this and then giving my opponents the win.
So this one is a tough one for me. I think a large part of the reason why Defense Grid kind of falls into this category of what would be considered overrated is because I think a lot of the play patterns of silence and those white lock you out effects, or the white, what we call silence effects. It's the quintessential term we put to all of this, to put to these actual effects. And what happens is that when you're not in white, you crave that silence effect so much that you start looking for it and start, I'm going to say, almost forcing it into the things that you want it to have it in. So, for example, Tidal Barracuda is, it's called Flash Fish. Basically, it has flash, and everyone's spells have flash, and your opponents can't cast spells on your turn. And we're seeing that in some Grixis lists. And that's because people have seen the play patterns of a resolved silence and just says, this game is over. Oh, silence resolved. Let's just scoop it. We know that it's done. And the fact that you can just be absolutely helpless against it is such a intoxicating play pattern that I think that we try to search for it in other places. I love the fact that you brought up Trinisphere, because for the longest time, Trinisphere was seen as a stacks piece, but we are so ravenous and so hungry for these silence-esque effects that I am seeing people run Trinisphere as a defense grid. I'm going to cast this and then try and go off through a Trinisphere. And it's this craving of being able to go off unimpeded through things like defense grid that allows us, or I think traps us into the ideas that in order for us to win, we need to have this type of protection to protect our win. When in fact, things like our interaction is already doing that for us, our counter spells and stuff like that. I saw people playing defense grid, I still do, in things like Rogsai. It's a 2-drop, which is nice. It's very efficient. But I've also seen them run Conqueror's Flail, which is a 4-drop. Kind of silence-esque effect once it's equipped. And it's like, they're really, really wanting these things. And if you're not careful, you will fall into this trap of trying to get this defense grid resolve. Somebody casts an actual silence over top of it. And you're like, oh my God, not only did I lose this game, I handed it to this player on a silver platter to the player next to me. Because now I and everyone else is locked out of their turn and they don't have to spend any extra mana. And so defense grid is in this very unique position that allows you to go off while your opponent's spells cost 3 more. But if you have to pass the turn through that example that I just mentioned, yeah, that feels so much worse. So this one is a tough one for me, but I definitely see why it would be on your list.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that competitive Magic players like to do with their cards is find a way to not play Magic. And I think that all of those silence effects fall into play, but I would much rather have a silence effect that is a true silence effect and just deal with that in the colors. And if I don't have it, okay, cool. Then what do I have? And I have interaction. If I don't have white, cool. I'll just play counter spells. And I think a lot of the time when I am playing with the defense grid, and I end up trying to play around it or with it, and I see what it happens, and we go into those play patterns where it is likely that I'm passing the turn with, giving this game to somebody. I'd much rather would just have the extra counterspell or the extra piece of interaction.
Yep.
And I think that's, like I said, we want to not play Magic in the best way possible, and having a card that just straight up says my opponents can't do the thing is really great. I've seen the fish. I've seen Flash Fish. I've seen people talk about it. I think that's really cool. But also, I think interaction works just as well, and there's a reason why you're playing that as well. You're already playing interaction. Just play an extra piece is my thought.
Okay, so my next one is the hottest of hot takes, and that is Gemstone Caverns. So Gemstone Caverns it's a joke everywhere that basically says it's the card you never want to draw. It's the worst. It's one of the worst cards in your decks, other than maybe a Mox Diamond if you don't have any lands. Like, it is the single worst card you ever want to draw. It is a 1 of 100, and it feels so good when you have the Gemstone and you're not going first, and you get to do this and you get to do that, and that's so great. But it is an overrated land. Oh, pregame action, this, that, and the other. The reason we say pregame action is because Gemstone Caverns, but more often than not, you pitch it to your discard phase. If you do drop it, you can almost choreograph that person is in a bad spot. If they're playing a Gemstone Caverns as their land for turn, they're struggling over there. It's almost a choreograph that they don't have anything, because it is a, other than the very opening hand, the worst land in your deck. A basic land is better than a Gemstone Caverns. And this is a hot take because it is one of the highest rated cards on the CEDH staples list. I think it's like number 4 or 5. It's like crazy high. Like, so many decks run this card. Actually, I could pull it up real quick. So January, it's number 4. It is the 4th most played card in CEDH. Gemstone Caverns. So, like, you want to talk about hot takes? I got the hot takes today. Like, Gemstone Caverns is way overrated. I know. Pre-game action, yes, you get an extra land drop. Exploration does the same thing, guys. Just so you know, if you're in green, cast Exploration, play another land, and you're pretty much you're almost at parity of what you were doing before. The only downside is you have to, play green, but that's another story. But this is it's an overrated land. I never want to see it. I never want to draw it. I never want to play it. I only ever want to see it in the opening hand when I'm not going first. It is so unbelievably niche, yet it is also so unbelievably played in our format. It is so ubiquitous. It is in the top 4 of all decks played. It is insane how much it's played. So I'm ready for the roast. So bring it on.
I think people are going to understand why it is here on your list, because I understand, but I also understand why it is played. And that's just because in a format where we put speed over everything else, or the ability to interact over anything else, having mana before the game even begins is so big. And the amount of games that I've won just because I've had Gemstones and Vampiric Tutor in the same hand, is great, because it's like, oh, great. Even before I get to start my turn, I get to go and get a card that I want. Great. It's amazing. And so I think everybody is just like, everybody is willing to play the lottery at that point. Like, yeah, sure. Yep. If I get it, that's fine. If not, well, I'm also running Mox Diamond, so here we go. But, like, the idea is that 80% of the time you're not getting that effect, and it just sits there, and it's the worst land ever.
It's not 80. It's like in the high 90s. It's like
I don't know what's wrong with your luck, Ryan, but it's 80 for you.
I wish I had your luck. Good Lord.
But yeah, it's definitely not a card you want to see. It is the worst card probably every single time. And doesn't matter what deck. I still play it though, because I do want that start. But yeah, it does suck.
Yep. I see it played everywhere. It doesn't matter the list. Turbo, that doesn't matter. Anything. Mid-range, control, stacks, monocolored, 5-color, Gemstone Caverns is always in all the decks. It's in every single deck because of that one instance, like you said, where your confirmation bias kicks in. You said, you remember that time I got to turn 0 Vampiric Tutor? Those are good times. Versus the time where you dropped your Gemstone Caverns and people actually sighed. They're like, oh, poor guy. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're struggling over there, aren't you? That's the kind of reaction it gets.
The day that I go to my playgroup and drop a card on the board and everybody's like, oh no, do you need something? Are you okay? Is everything okay at home? Like, yeah, all right, I'm packing up. I'm gonna play Pauper. This is just trash.
They're like, ooh, really? Gemstone? Wow, your hand sucks. That's terrible. Oh, that wheel wasn't good to you, was it?
God. And that's when you usually see it too. It's like off a wheel when you're like, oh, everybody gets 7 cards. Here I get 6. That's great. Yeah. Okay. So we do have one honorable mention here on our list. And that is a card that I do want to talk about heavily, because this is a card that I still run, though I do understand that people gas this card up a lot. And it's it's Seedborn Muse. This card is 5 mana, eat a counterspell all day, every day. eat interaction, eat a bolt, eat whatever. Thrasios was and is still, but was a very big proponent of this format, and Thrasios and Seedborn Muse go hand in hand like peanut butter and jelly. Thrasios also goes really good with Kinnan. I would be remiss to say that I don't need them in either of those lists. In any threat, I don't need a Seedborn Muse on Thrasios in order to win. And it does help. It helps a lot, but I don't need it. I also don't need it in Kinnan. It helps. It helps a lot. I don't need it. And the amount of times that I think a pattern that I've had this entire video has been talking about moments where this card has done nothing for me. But I will say the thing about Seedborn Muse is that a lot of its value that I've had lately with the card has been strictly because of its fear, the fear that it brings among the rest of the pod. because if I put down that I'm playing Kinnan, or I'm put down that I'm playing Thrasios, or I put down that I'm playing any green deck with some sort of activated ability, everybody's mind goes immediately, I have to hold interaction for the Seedborn Muse. There's a Seedborn Muse coming, and I cannot let it slide. And I love it because oftentimes I will just have the 5 mana, cast the Seedborn Muse, and have everybody fight over it. And meanwhile, I have combo in hand the entire time. It's here. But it's just because everybody is so scared of Seedborn Muse. We can't let them have that. No, there's no way to have that. Blah, 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 blah. That most of the times I end up winning because they're not worried about the correct thing. They would much rather, the amount of times I played Kinnan and people are way more scared of a Seedborn Muse and me having 7 to 6 mana on board than me having the Nezahal on board or the Consecrated Sphinx is insane. I'm like, yeah, I do get to untap and I get to keep farming, but you do realize I'm drawing like 8 cards per rotation, right? Like, maybe let's prioritize this. And I think that's always just mind-boggling to me how much people invest stock into this card. That yeah, if it goes on, sure, it can win you the game. Most of the time, it's not going to survive a full rotation. And even then, sometimes I'm doing it just for the value, right? Especially on a Thrasios list, dude. I'm drawing a card. I'm drawing a card every time. Yeah, I could do that with whatever. If I played Ristic Steady, this would be great. I get it. It's really great, but I think the amount of value that it gives me actually is not accurately described by a lot of people. And so for that reason, I keep playing it just because I know people are scared of it, and that allows a lot of my other threats to go under the radar. But also, I can also see it going in the other direction where it is so terrifying that other people allow other people's things to go under the radar. So I cast Seedborn Muse, and there's somebody who's actively presenting a win on their next turn, and we know it, and we have that information. But because they're so scared of me having that Seedborn Muse because of the meta that we're in and what that card represents, they would much rather work to get rid of the Seedborn Muse than to actually allow everybody to work together. And I understand that this card has that ability to turn games into my favor, but I think the reality of it is, for 5 mana, you have to, I think this card's value comes with accurately reading the board state. And I think a lot of people forget that second part. They just see Seedborn Muse and think, oh, they're winning. Okay, kill it. But if I'm casting a Seedborn Muse into something with like 4 mana open, or like 2 cards in hand, or anything else, like, maybe it's okay. Or we have other people who are presenting wins. Maybe you need me to have that because and that I understand that sounds like politicking. You might not believe that, and I understand. But I do think that people give this card way more stock than it is and end up losing games because of it.
Seedborn Muse is a trap in a lot of ways. It's a 5-drop that does nothing on its own. You need to have a board state that can take advantage of a Seedborn Muse. So a lot of times what people don't see are the times that Seedborn Muse rots in your hand. It just sits there, does nothing, because you just don't have the board state to be able to take advantage of it. Somebody to turn 2 Drannith Magistrate, and they were like, oh, now I can't put my Kinnan on the board, or I can't get my Thrasios on the board, and I'm just kind of just doing nothing and passing and doing nothing and passing, and I'm sitting here looking at the Seedborn Muse that does absolutely nothing for me. But that's not the games they remember. They remember the game where you dropped a Seedborn Muse, and then you had the One Ring and a bunch of mana out, and you're activating Kinnan and activating Thrasios, and it went turn, I did it, turn, I did it, turn, I did it, and you felt so powerful doing it. You felt like you were just, were supercharging, were so much better than all the other players. But I always challenge people who have those situations where they're using that bias to evaluate Seedborn Muse to say, you mean to tell me that you were able to untap during other people's turns and they could not stop your Seedborn Muse? Seedborn Muse wasn't why you won that game. You were going to win that game anyway, because they didn't have anything to stop what you were doing. And more often than not, what you see is somebody slams down a Seedborn Muse, they untap with you, and then as you try to, go off or whatever on their instep, they just kill a Seedborn Muse. Or just on your instep, if you tapped out for a Seedborn Muse, I'll cast, my commander, like Kennen, I'll put my Seedborn Muse, I'll pass the turn. Okay, on your instep, I'll kill your Seedborn Muse. And so then it was just dead then too. But these aren't the things that we remember. We remember the times when we feel like Superman, taking all the turn equity in every other player's turn and doing 1.5 million things, and all of your draws are great on Thrasios, and just your deck is firing on all cylinders, and you think it's because Seedborn Muse is doing it. And it's not. It's helping. It absolutely is helping. It's doing really good things. But I agree that it is not what is single-handedly making your deck go from good to great. Your deck was already good. It was doing just fine on its own. And if it was going to get around and you were going to draw 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cards off the one ring through that turn rotation, you were winning that game anyway. That it wasn't Seedborn that got you there. You were already going to win that game because no one could remove Seedborn, which means they're probably not going to be able to interact with any of the other things you do. And you might as well have just cast a Basalt and won that game on your turn instead of wasting everyone's time.
Absolutely. I think you said it perfectly at that point. I think it honestly, a lot of people don't want to hear it, but I do think that it is a win more card. I think it is one of those cards that, my board state is great, and now I'm just going to take advantage of it because I'm going to be able to do whatever I want, every turn. But okay, cool. If you didn't have the thing to, I love that you said that. If you didn't have the thing to counter or get rid of Seedborn anyways, then you didn't have the thing to get rid of Perplexing Chimera. You didn't have the thing to get rid of Kinnan. You didn't have the thing to get rid of Thrasios. Hullbreaker Horror. You didn't have anything anyway, so it didn't matter what I did. Yeah. I could have went here and, I don't know, got some Yu-Gi-Oh cards for all I mattered and started playing. It didn't matter.
You could have went off. Yeah, you could have just went off on the turn you cast Seedborn Muse.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't have the stop for it, then you were going to win anyway. Absolutely. It wasn't Seedborn Muse that got you there. You were winning because they would have stopped Seedborn Muse.
100%. Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I've got nothing else to say on that. Yeah. Seedborn Muse, overrated, and stop countering mine.
Let it go. It's totally overrated. Don't worry about it.
Stop it. It's fine.
I can't hit a Kinnan activation every time.
Dude, it whips. It whips. I promise. Look. Oh, yeah. Well, there's Conch Sphinx. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that is our whole list. How many people do you think we upset, Ryan? I think we did a lot.
All of the people. All of them. Every single one.
Every single people.
If nothing else, because of the Gemstone Caverns, the Born Upon a Wind, the Ragavan, the Defense Grid, we've lost all of our followers. We appreciated you at least listening to the point when you stopped.
Absolutely. But I do hope that you guys take what we said into consideration. And at the very least, we did explain why. We weren't just saying things just for shock value. These are actual thoughts. And with that being said, we want to know to the listeners, what card in the format do you feel is overrated? Let us know your hot takes. That way we can roast you for your thoughts. let us know what you think is bad or overrated, and we'll tell you it's a bad idea. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, definitely let us know what card in the format do you feel is overrated. And that is another episode of the podcast. Make sure to give us a thumbs up or give us a review on your favorite podcast aggregator. You can find us on just about any social media platform, Playing with Power MTG. Check us out. All links are in the episode notes or around. And yeah, tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time. Take care, guys.